Dick, would you please introduce our speaker today?
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians and guests. Tomorrow, as we know, we are observing Veterans Day. And as I think
Thank you,
about
Dick.
that, I'm reminded that this past August, I had the honor of achieving a lifelong dream of visiting Normandy and walking on Omaha Beach. A week later, I visited the grave of my uncle who fought in the Battle of Bulge and was killed a week before the war ended. Other reflections include losing my best friend in high school due to injuries suffered from serving in Vietnam. As a Peace Corps country director in the 90s, I have fond memories of a wonderful PCV, Peace Corps volunteer who had served in Vietnam as a Green Beret. Now, most recently, over the past 2 weeks, I have been traveling to Quantico Marine Corps base to work with Marines in teaching English to Afghan refugees. In these instances, I have been privileged to have been in the presence of warriors for peace. Today, we are privileged to have a warrior for peace as our speaker. Chic Dambach's entire life has been devoted to the cause of peace. His book, Exhaust the Limits, is well named, as it, along with the positions he has held, accurately reflects his commitment to peace. Those positions, among others, include President of the National Peace Corps Association, President Alliance for Peacebuilding, Chief Executive Officer of Operation Respect, Professor of Peace and Conflict Resolution, Board Member, Institute for Economics and Peace, Chief of Staff for Returned Peace Corps Volunteer Congressman Garamendi, and Peace Corps Volunteer in Colombia. No wonder Chic was recently nominated by members of Congress for the Nobel Peace Prize. And finally, absolute proof of Chic's ability to wage peace is that in spite of his Oklahoma State Cowboys recently beating up on my poor Texas Longhorns, he remains a very good friend. Welcome, Chic. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Dick. And I'm sure glad we beat you guys this year. We don't always do that, but I'm glad we did this year. It's a real pleasure and privilege to speak to this Rotary Club. I've probably talked to 20 or 30 Rotary clubs over the years in various places all over the country. But I've addressed this club, I think, twice before, but it's a real privilege because this one is really special. And I feel a strong connection with Rotary. I'm not currently a member, but have been a member of clubs off and on over the years. One of the things that I'm particularly pleased with, and this wasn't the case earlier on when I was much younger and member of Rotary, but as I hope all of you know, Rotary has made building peace one of its top priorities. And if you go to do a Google search for Rotary plus the word peace, a whole bunch of stuff just pops up of indicating the extent of Rotary's involvement in peace. And I just put some of them in the slide to give you an idea of what'll pop up if you put in the words Rotary and peace. You're probably familiar with Rotary Peace Centers all over the world. There are 5 of them, one here in the US, one in Japan, one in England, one in Australia, pardon me, and one in Sweden. This is where graduate level education in peace building, conflict resolution is training young professionals in this area. I travel all over the world and meet with the top professionals in the peace building world, and all the time they'll say, "Oh, I was a Rotary Peace Fellow." I said, "Well, I'm not surprised, because Rotary is able to identify the people with the talent and the skill and the equipment, enable them to go to get graduate degrees in peace building, conflict resolution, and they carry on in significant positions." In addition, Rotary has developed partnerships with any number of organizations, but there are 2 of them, actually 3 in a way, that I'm personally very much involved with. One of them is the Peace Corps, another is the National Peace Corps Association, and there's the Institute for Economics and Peace. With regard to the Peace Corps, Bill and I were talking about this earlier. He's very familiar with it. I hope everybody knows Bill was a Peace Corps volunteer. But Rotary has a partnership with the Peace Corps where Rotary clubs throughout the world can connect with Peace Corps volunteers and engage with them in partnership in the projects that the Peace Corps volunteers are involved with. Rotary clubs here in the US can connect with volunteers who are serving elsewhere around the world, provide support for them and get informed as to what they're doing. The National Peace Corps Association is the organization of the Peace Corps community, the people that once served in the Peace Corps as volunteers or staff, and a huge portion of the returned Peace Corps volunteer community is also involved with Rotary. So even though there's not a formal relationship between the National Peace Corps Association and Rotary, not a formally designated partnership, we feel like there is because just personally, people like Dick Pyle and so many others are directly involved with Rotary. And then there's the Institute for Economics and Peace. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with IEP, but it has a formal relationship with Rotary. IEP, and I serve on their board. We have a board meeting tomorrow, as a matter of fact. But IEP is a fascinating organization based in Sydney, Australia, founded by a guy named Steve Killalay, who is a high-tech entrepreneur, brilliant man, make a ton of money, as some people do in that field. But he recognized that one of the greatest needs in the world was simply to reduce the frequency and severity of violent conflict. He was supporting development programs in the poorest places in the world. He said, well, they're too violent to be able to make any progress. We've got to find a way to help them become more peaceful. And if they can do that, then that provides a safe, secure, and stable basis for social, political, and economic development. So he created something called the Global Peace Index to identify the most peaceful countries in the world and to learn from them. What a novel idea. Most of us who study peace and conflict study the places that are at war and say, what did they do wrong? Steve said, well, let's find out what the countries that are at peace are doing right. And I hear all the time, you can't do anything about it. Countries are always at war, always will be at war, nothing you can do about it. Say, well, wait a second. Most of the world is at peace. Most of the world is at peace. If most of the world can be at peace, why can't the rest of the world be at peace? And Steve's idea is to study and analyze the most peaceful countries, see what they're doing right, and use that as a role model for the rest of the world. A metaphor for it that Steve and I both like to use is if you want to become an Olympic champion marathon runner, you wouldn't study the people that never even made it to the Olympic Games. You'd study the people that won the gold medals. What are they doing right? If we want to make the world more peaceful, let's see what the people are doing that are doing it right. The people in the countries and societies that are most peaceful. So that's what the Institute for Economics and Peace is all about. They rank the countries of the world in terms of their peacefulness, where they focus on the most peaceful countries to see what are the qualities and characteristics of those countries that the rest of the world can emulate. And Rotary has a very strong partnership with the Institute for Economics and Peace. Among the things it has done is develop a concept of positive peace and promoting a culture of peace, looking at the attitudes, institutions, and structures that enable countries to live peacefully. Things like well-functioning government, free flow of information, free press, the sound business environment, high level of human capital, good education systems, low levels of corruption, things like that. So you identify those are the primary ingredients of peace. And then we look at societies around the world and the countries around the world and see how are you doing with regard to those elements and see where they need to be beefed up and strengthened to become more peaceful. The IEP also focuses on the economic impact of violence. Their economic analysis shows that violence of all kinds, this isn't just warfare, it's also domestic violence and criminal activity and so on, has a negative $14.4 trillion impact on the global economy. $14.4 trillion negative. If you can just reduce it by 10%, think of the impact that it would have on the GDP worldwide. In their analysis over the years, 85 countries have become less violent, 78 have become more violent over the years. But the point being that improvements in peace can lead to considerable economic improvement in GDP growth, dealing with inflation and employment issues. So I'm pleased to be deeply involved with IEP. I've been involved with it from its very inception. Steve and I have been friends since the whole thing began, and I've worked closely with him. And to see this partnership with Rotary means a lot to him and to me. In terms of economics and peace, the correlation between peacefulness and prosperity is unmistakable. Most of us were raised on the notion that war is good for the economy, and that is absolute nonsense. It is simply not true. War is dreadful for the economy. We thought we came out of the Great Depression that had World War II, and then we were prosperous, so therefore war was good for the economy. I'm sorry, that is a total misunderstanding of that relationship. So the point being, of course, that the most peaceful countries in the world are also the most prosperous countries in the world. And I've always enjoyed this quotation from Dwight Eisenhower, who of course was a military guy. He said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies to the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed." That was General Eisenhower, military guy, indicating the economic impact of violence. The good news is that the world is becoming more peaceful. And that I think is really quite remarkable. Most of us have the notion that the world is terrible because the news covers the violence. But Steven Pinker has done a detailed analysis of human history and concluded that we may be living in the most peaceable era in our species' existence. And here's a chart indicating worldwide battle deaths per 100,000 people over the years. And as you can see, we're down now to where the violence that we read about in the newspapers barely even makes a blip on the chart compared with what it was decades ago. So that's the good news, is that we are making remarkable progress toward building a more peaceful world. A significant part of this has to be attributed to the United Nations. We complain about the UN, but the fact of the matter, it has done a phenomenal job over the decades to reduce the frequency and severity of violent conflict. The UN was created to deal with war between nation states. That was its original mission. The fact of the matter is that war between nation states has almost ceased to exist. There's conflict within countries, but conflict between countries is now very, very rare in the United Nations. And you can trace that back to the creation of the United Nations and the work it has been able to do. So I can't talk about building peace without giving credit to the UN. Part of the reason I like to talk about these things is about the role that private citizens can play in building peace. I like the quotation from George Bernard Shaw, said, "You see things they were and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not? Why not do something about it?" And of course, President Kennedy said, "One person can make a difference and everyone should try." And this is an area where all of us can try. We can all do things that'll make a difference. And we've developed this concept of peace building in which private citizens as well as government agencies can work together to create a culture of peace, facilitate communication, negotiation, mediation among belligerents at all levels to resolve conflicts without resorting to the use of violent conflict. I had an opportunity to become deeply involved in one of the major conflicts in Africa. This was 2 decades ago now. Border war broke out between Ethiopia and Eritrea. My friend John Garamendi, now a member of Congress, had served in the Peace Corps in Ethiopia. My phone rang one day, it was John. He said, "Chic, my friends are killing each other. We've got to do something about it." I said, "John, I don't have a clue what we can do, but let's give it a try." And I won't go into the details, but basically we built a trust relationship with the heads of state of the 2 countries. In Ethiopia and in Eritrea, this is Isaias Afwerki, the president of Eritrea. We met with him, with Meles Zenawi at the time, the late Meles Zenawi, but at the time Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and we were able to get them over an extended period of time to finally agree to end the war. And Meles sent us a note after the treaty signing ceremony in Algiers, saying your contribution was invaluable for creating the momentum and the spirit which made this historic achievement possible. These are just some private citizens John and myself and a couple of other former Peace Corps volunteers, working with the leaders of these countries, helping them reach the point of saying, let's put an end to the violent conflict. And I'll never forget, about 2 months after the treaty was signed, I bought a hot dog at a kiosk at the corner of 18th and L. And the lady in the kiosk looked like she was from the Horn of Africa. Said, where are you from? She said, Eritrea. I said, I thought so. Said, I know your president, Isaias Afwerki. And she kind of looked at me like, who are you? I mean, who's ever heard of Eritrea, let alone it was the name of the president? Said, I'm Chic Dambach. And her eyes got big and she said, I know you. I know who you are. You brought peace to my country. She had followed what we had done through Eritrean news throughout. And she bounded out and gave me a big hug, and we've been best of friends ever since. And have done a number of other things over the years, currently deeply involved in Mali, another African country, chair of something called the Mali Affinity Group that brings together the civil society, the diaspora, with the NGOs and with the embassy to try to help them find ways to deal with a complex set of conflicts that are debilitating the country terribly. As a result of that, the president of the country designated myself and the two others of us as knights. We're just inducted into the Order of Knights for Mali. It's the highest honor they give to anybody outside the country. And we private citizens, for trying to help them deal with their problems, gave us that distinction. I tell this story simply to say that these are some of the kinds of things that private citizens can do. So can peace be built? The answer is yes, it can. With the right institutions, we've built the Alliance for Peacebuilding, the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission, U.S. Institute of Peace, and of course, Rotary in the things that it does. There are books out now about peace building. If I had gone on Amazon 50 years ago when I was in school, 60 years ago now, I wouldn't have found anything because Amazon didn't exist. But even if it did exist, there wouldn't have been much. Now there are about 2,000 books that deal in one way or another with building a more peaceful world. That's the way we build a culture of peace, is writing about it, talking about it, sharing information, getting people believing that it can be done, and working together to make it happen. I would love to have studied it when I went to school 60 years ago. I couldn't. There was not a single accredited academic program in the world, not one in the entire world, focused on building peace. Now there are over 200. This is how we build a culture of peace and help reduce the frequency and severity, pardon me, of violent conflict. So can Rotary build peace? Yes, we can. You're doing it, and I'm proud to be connected with you, and want to just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. Maintain your partnerships with the Peace Corps, Institute of Economics and Peace. There are clubs throughout the world finding ways they can work together to help reduce the frequency and severity of violent conflict. It has every kind of benefit, economic as well as social and personal. So with that, let me stop and respond to any questions you may have.
I'd like to start by asking a question about a lot of what you've talked about focuses on international peace building. And my question is with regard to domestic. I noticed the United States is actually fairly high in IEP's, their standards of violent countries. And of course, we live in a city that has been known over years to be a violent city. What is your recommendation for us domestically, either here in the Washington area or abroad or farther afield in the United States, if we want to be promoters of peace in our community and in our country?
That's a great question. And interestingly, the Alliance for Peacebuilding originally only dealt with conflicts around the world. And we wonderful people in the US can go out and solve other people's problems for them. I always found people say, what about in your own country? And so we do indeed have a serious problem here. And in fact, our ranking in the Global Peace Index is very low, shamefully low. What I would suggest you do is get in touch with some of the people and organizations. We talked about partnerships. There are a number of organizations dealing with the violence here in the US and doing a remarkable job. I would highly recommend one in particular is called Search for Common Ground. And Search is one of the organizations that used to work entirely overseas. And they have now turned inward to the US. They still do the work they have always done all over the world. But if you get in touch with Search for Common Ground, you can just do a Google search for them. And they now have programs going all over the world and certainly here in Washington, DC. And so you could partner with Search for Common Ground, and the Alliance for Peacebuilding would know the other organizations that are doing things. So that's what I would recommend, is to partner with some people who are doing it and doing it well, doing it effectively, and they would be able to steer you in the right direction for activities you could take on that would make a difference right here.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to Bill Day to ask a question. Bill.
Another former Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah, wonderful.
Maybe
Bill.
not so wonderful when you get to my question.
Oh, he's a lawyer too, so watch out.
I'm in trouble.
The lowest of the low. Okay, question. Piggybacking on Steve's question, we are the country with the highest investment in war in the world. If there's a single greatest threat to world peace, I would say in 3 letters, I would say it is CIA. We've had torture sites. We have fomented internal conflicts throughout the Middle East. We've invaded countries. We have special forces across the globe. So when in the spirit of charity begins at home, what should the United States be doing to change its dynamic internationally?
Well, I think you know the answer to that. To stop doing much of what we've been doing. There's certainly a reason for the United States to be involved and to have a CIA and so on, but the record, the history of it, frankly, is not one that we could be, can be, or should be proud of. Certainly our military has done wonderful things throughout the world. They've also screwed up big time in an awful lot of places around the world. The good news from my perspective is that there is a changing attitude within the military and a recognition that these things are counterproductive and destructive and not things that we can be or should be proud of. Now that I'm retired, I don't get invited anymore, but I used to get invited to lecture at West Point. And the first time I went up, I was scared to death that if I told them what was really on my mind, you'd see my body floating down the Hudson River. But I told them what was on my mind, and the commander of West Point took me to lunch and said, "I appreciate what you're saying." He said, "You're absolutely right." He said, "We appreciate you, and we want you, the peace builders, to be successful." He said, "We don't want to shoot at people. We certainly don't want people shooting at us. How can we work together to reduce the frequency and the number of times we get called in to fight?" So there are conferences all over with the military, and they now invite us, the peace builders, to come to their conferences. I've lectured at the War College up in Carlisle and participated in their conferences. They have a long, long, long ways to go. No question about it. But at least there is a changing attitude within the military to recognition that coming in with guns blazing is not the best way to deal with the conflicts and the issues that we face around the world. So there is change happening. I would love to see it happen more rapidly, but at least there is a change happening. And of course, we can go to members of Congress and to the administration, share our perspective on it and make the case. And to the extent that we can make it persuasively, policies can and sometimes do change. But I certainly understand your question.
How do we find out about those cooperative ventures between peace builders and the military?
Get in touch with the Alliance for Peacebuilding, AFP Alliance for Peacebuilding. You just do a Google search for them. It'll come up and you can ask them about it and they would be happy to let you know. Liz Hume is the acting CEO, and there's several other people there as well who would know about it and would be able to let you know what's happening.
I would just say in my experience with military, they are the last ones who want to go to war because they understand what it costs.
Exactly, exactly. And that's reflected in what the commander at West Point said to me. You know, we don't want to shoot people. We certainly don't want them shooting at us.
Yeah, exactly. So President Bill has a question. Bill, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my question, which I'll read from the chat. Where are the hotspots in the world that most worry you at this time? And how do you think they can be best addressed?
Well, I'd put it into two broad categories. One of them is the kind of the local violence that probably wouldn't reach our shores, but is dreadfully destructive to the people where it's happening. And the obviously terrorism is one of the things that we're aware of, and certainly the jihadist movements are dreadful. They're just doing awful stuff. And by the way, I work very closely with some of the leaders in the Muslim world who share that concern and are probably more concerned about it than any of us. But it's much of it has moved to the Sahel region of Africa. And that's the reason I've been so involved with Mali. Mali is kind of the epicenter of it for the Sahel region, which is kind of the Sahara, Southern Sahara region of Africa. It's just become awful. It's the most dangerous UN peacekeeping mission in the world is in Mali. So that is certainly one that concerns me. But you know, you can look to any one of a number of others that are in the news. On the larger scale, you know, I think back to my youth and the Cold War when we were crawling under desks to learn how to avoid being killed in a nuclear attack, which of course wouldn't have done us a bit of good. It just felt good to do it, but it wouldn't have protected us from anything. But I am concerned about a bit of a growing Cold War. It doesn't reach the point of being called that yet, but the relationship with China and Russia is certainly volatile. And I don't think we're anywhere even close to that becoming a shooting war and to the level that it was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But I think it is something that we need to be aware of and make sure that policies are carried out that reduce tensions rather than escalating the tensions.
Thank you so much. Such an interesting presentation. One of the ways that we connect peace and the environment is through our Trees for the Capital program, which we're expanding actually to be Trees for the World. And we're starting to do some international projects. But here in Washington, D.C. for the last 30 years, we have been planting a tree in the honor of each of our speakers. And we're going to plant a tree in your honor. Thank
Wonderful.
you for
Thank
speaking
you.
to us today.